Everyone, welcome back, and today we're going to pick up where we left off. So the first problem that we're going to solve is correctly initializing a state for our components. So if I refresh the main page and I look at the HTML syntax, or rather the HTML markup, we can see that the posts are loading correctly. But if we go to a single post and refresh the page here and I look at the HTML markup, we can see that it's still loading blogs. So the problem here is that we are specifically choosing to load all blogs, and we're not deciding what data we need to load based on the component that we're rendering. So to solve this problem, we need to find out what component is being rendered, and then we can specify what data needs to be loaded at a component level. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to stop my application for this. I'm going to close my terminal. So first things first, we want to be able to load the component that is being rendered. So let's go ahead and say const components, since multiple components can be rendered. And we can go to the router for this. So the router can basically has a function called getMatchedComponents. And this is basically in our main.js. When we have this main component here, this will be a matched component. What we can do is we can say get all the components for which we need to load some data. All right, and since we're going to be specifying at a component level what data we need to load, let's go into our pages, into main.app, and what we will do is we will say create a new function, which we will call loadAsync, and this function will essentially be called on our server side specifically to load data. Okay, so now let's go ahead and grab our components and let's map them. So we will be taking each individual component. We want to execute a function, and in this function we will say, right, if I'll actually rename x to component. If the component has a loadAsync function, right? So this will return true if it can find the loadAsync function on the component. We want to go ahead and execute it. Okay, so then let's go ahead, call component, and let's call loadAsync. One thing to note is that the Vue server-side renderer, if you are going to go into the documentation and you're going to read it, it provides us with a server async function. However, because we are doing it through .NET Core, we don't have access to the URL. So we will still need the origin, and we don't have access to this. And this, I mean, is this app, or like rather this component. We don't have access to the component this, all right? So what we will need to do is to pass in the store to this function. So essentially, if we take this function and pick it apart, we need the store and the origin. So let's go ahead and pass in the store and the origin to this function. Shouldn't have formatted, but let's go ahead and now cut this, put this here. So it looks exactly the same, but we are not resolving our app here. Let's go ahead and just return this. I will grab this part. So we have the promise here that we return. Now the thing with this is because we're mapping, we might have multiple loadAsyncs. All right. So we will need to wait for all the promises to finish. And luckily we can do promise all, and this function will accept this. And once all of them are finished, we can call then and resolve the app. Okay. So one thing left is for this specific scope segment to return a promise. Okay. So let's go ahead and return this promise. And now let's pass our store and our origin to this function. I will remove this comment here, and let's go ahead and double check that this works. So I will clear my console and use .NET Run. Okay, so let's go back to here. Let's give this a refresh. Let's look at the HTML, and we can see that our data is still being loaded. So if we go to a specific blog post and refresh, we can see that it's still loading blog. That's okay. That's because we haven't specified our loadAsync function. So let's go ahead and do the same for our post here. So I'm going to go ahead and specify a loadAsync function. Again, I'm just going to accept the store and the origin like this. And now what I will need to do is call store dispatch load blog. And one thing that I will need to do is pass in an ID and the origin at the same time. So if you remember, if we go to main.js and we find the load blog, we do accept an ID. So I want to do something similar as to resolving the origin here as well. So I'll just copy this, put it here. I'll turn this into an object and I'll call origin ID like so. And I will copy this part and I'll put it here. Okay, so if we don't have an origin, we will provide one. And now we actually need to pass in the ID to this function as well from our server. So let's see what we do here. So we go into this route params ID. All right, so we are getting the ID from the router, so we can do the same thing here. Let's go ahead and say router and find the function. So let's see app, something else in here, children. There we have the route. And do we have params here? We do. Okay, so I will stop at parameters. So let's go ahead and say const params equals this. And I will just pass whatever parameters there are in the route. I will pass into the load async function as well. So for the main, we don't need params, so we're not destructuring it from the object. For the post, we will need them. So I'll just say params. And now I can specify the origin and the ID to be params.id. Okay. And again, same as I do with the main here, I need to return this promise. So let's make sure that I return it here. And if I go into main.js, I need to make sure I return it here. And I do. So let's go ahead and go back into our browser. Let's give this a refresh. And I can see here that it says parmas is not defined. Looks like I'm trying to pass a piece of cheese to my component. So server params here. Okay, so let's give this another refresh. Okay, so that is actually a good sign, because if we look at the HTML, we will see that it has actually loaded the blog, so we no longer see loading blog, and this is breaking because our client our client JavaScript hasn't caught up, and this is this error here, and the rest of it we just haven't fixed up yet. So let's go ahead and now make our client-side JavaScript catch up with the server-side JavaScript now that we're actually loading all the data. So our server-side JavaScript is making the journey to where we need to be, and our client JavaScript is sort of left behind. So let's go ahead and solve that problem. So the way that we do this, since we're loading the stuff in the store, so once it has gone through this load async function, our store will have its state, this state here, filled up. So let's go ahead and grab this context. We'll take state here, and what we will do is we will just go ahead, say store and state. So we'll assign it to it, and let's do it down here. So cancel. After all of our promises have been completed, let's go ahead and pass in this state to this context here, which then if we go to the boot server, this is where the context basically will, this is inside of this function, render async, render to string, I mean, that's where the state will be assigned to it. And this is where we, in this resolve function, this is where we return it. So let's go ahead and say globals, and the convention for this is basically to set an initial state variable here to context.state. All right, and this is just a convention. So this will, when we set it to globals, we essentially assign it to the browser Windows object. So that's where we'll be able to retrieve it. So again, if we go to the server context.state, this is where we put our store data. and we will actually be able to see this here, I think. So if I refresh and go back to the HTML that's being rendered, if I scroll all the way to the end here, now you can see the script tag added. And let me actually make this full screen. You can see the script tag being added, window.initialState, and well, you can see the blogs are empty, but the selected blog isn't empty. And it's a pity it's one line. I keep snapping back. But yeah, here's the initial state that's being set, and that's pretty much what we're after. Okay, so since we have the state passed to the client, which is our browser, we can then use our client bundle to catch up with the state. So let's go into our client.js. I'll go back to full screen, and I'll say here where I put the comment, catch up with server here. I will say if window initial state. If we have it, let's go ahead and grab our store, and we'll replace state with this variable here. Okay, should be enough. I'll give this refresh, and you can see that we are actually catching up with the blog. So if I go back into the console, and the only thing that we have is this weird error here, but this is because of the lifecycle hooks and us not checking properly for stuff that we have already fetched. So what I mean by that, if we go into main.view, and here you can see the created hook. This hook is actually executed on the server, and we don't actually want to do this because we are loading it async here. So this is the loading for the server. So we don't want to call the created hook on the server. And sometimes, I think if we look into the console, this error that pops up here is essentially this created hook is what's causing it. So the hook that is not getting executed on the server is mounted. So mounted is the hook that basically mounts it to the browser DOM. So we don't have a browser DOM, so this is essentially what we have. So this will never get executed on the server. Not to have it execute on the browser either, we can go ahead and call this blogs. If we basically have any blogs, we don't want to do this. So blogs length, let's say less than 1. So if there are no blogs, go ahead and load me some blogs, okay? And we want to do the same in our posts. So let's change the created lifecycle hook to mounted, and I will say if this dot selected blog, if we have one, or rather if we don't have one, then load it. Okay, and another thing here, this error in the browser, what this was saying is when it's trying to call this function, this load blog, you can see that we're passing just the ID parameter here, and we're actually expecting an object now. So let's go ahead and turn this into an object and assign this to the ID parameter. We can keep the origin undefined, and then our implementation in the store here, right here, will actually handle it. So that's fine. So remember, change your hooks to mounted and make sure to check that it's not already loaded. So now let's go ahead, clear the console. Let's give this a refresh. No errors. The initial load already contains our blog post, and our state is being passed to the client, and our client is correctly catching up with the state from the server. All right. So now that that's solved, let's go ahead and solve the next problem. So if you see, if we refresh, we get this first just text rendered and no CSS that is actually being rendered here. And to solve this problem is actually not too hard. What we would need to do is to basically create a template, and then the Vue server-side renderer will actually have a place to put the CSS. So it is actually trying to hold our hand and take care of injecting CSS automatically, but we're just not providing a place for it to do it. So let's go ahead and create a template file in our Vue app. I'm going to go ahead and create index.html. I'm going to put 1 exclamation mark and scaffold this out. I'll go full screen here. I will delete the title. We will fill up the meta tags in a minute. Let's go ahead and create a div, and this is where our app will sit. So ID app, And what we'll need to do for the Vue server-side renderer to actually inject the HTML rendered from the app into this template is we will need to provide a comment for it. So let's put an HTML comment and let's say Vue SSR outlet. And that's it. This is where our HTML from the server-side rendering will be injected, and it will try to automatically inject CSS into the head. So I'm not going to close it yet. What I will do is I will go into my boot server, and this is where I will need to provide my template, which are going to be part of the options class, to the create bundle renderer. So let's go ahead and create a const view render options, or rather, let's say render options. Yeah, I think that will be an okay name. And in here, we want to provide a template, and this template we will need to load. We'll actually need to load it. So let's go ahead and create a file stream that we can read the file, and fs. So fs namespace, I'll take fs, and I will read file sync. And now I can say path join. So same as we resolve the path here, I'll actually, well, I grab it. Yeah, let's go ahead and grab it. There's not too much to type out. And since we are already in the Vue app folder, and this is where the index.html lives, I can just say ./index.html. We'll grab the file and assign it to the template. And now we can take the render options and pass it to the create bundle renderer function. So let's go ahead and pass in our render options. I'm not sure if I'll need to refresh or not. Let's go ahead and give this a refresh. Okay, and it looks like I am getting an error because I haven't specified the format. So I want to go ahead and say UTF-8 here. That's the type of text that's going to be in there. And now we're getting content placeholder not found in template. So that basically tells me that I have misspelled something here. And it's Vue SSR, not SRR, so that's that. Let's go ahead and give this a refresh. Okay, and there we have it. You can see that we no longer see the little twitch that happens. So let's go ahead and take a look at the network. And here you can see all the styles being loaded inside the HTML, and they're injected into our head here. Okay, so the final piece of the puzzle that we can solve is populating the title and some meta tags based on the page that we're on, right? So that's what server-side rendering is all about. That's the prime benefit of it. So let's go ahead and, again, following the documentation, I'm just gonna go full screen again. I'm gonna render title, and these are the things that are gonna have to appear on the on the context. So again, going to the boot server, this context, this is just the way the Vue server-side renderer is made. And if it's gonna find the context.title and context.meta on there, it will put the title in the title spot, and it will put the meta in the meta spot. Okay, so all we have to do is do the same thing that we did with loading per page. Sorry, loading data per a component, but now we have to load meta and title per component as well. So let's go ahead and close this index.html. Let's go into our main.vue first, and let's just go ahead and create the meta function. Okay, in this case, I don't think it will actually need to be a function. Since this is the main page, I can go ahead and say that the title will be megablog, and let's say that the meta, do I want the meta, or let's say we'll do a per meta field. So let's say description will be, this is an awesome super mega blog. Okay, and keywords, let's say Vue blog mega SSR. Now what we can do is we can go into our server here where we call the load async function. We can basically check if the component has a meta field. So we're checking for this object meta. So if we have it, it's going to return true, and we will enter the if clause, or rather the if statement. So let me close some of these files so I don't don't keep getting lost. Alright, so I'm checking this, and let's go ahead and just say const. Same when we do structure, I'll just grab the title, I will grab the description, and I'll grab the keywords, okay, from this component.meta, like so, and I will then say I'll grab the context, and I'll put the title here, and then I'll grab the meta. So this title and meta corresponds to these two tags here, and this is again just something that this Vue server renderer package has built in, and how it handles it. And I will just say create some meta tags. I think it was description, description, and content. I think that's the way they were made. And the content I can just set to description. Let's copy this meta tag. I will drop it back here, right to the wall, and I will set description to keywords, and I will pass my keywords here. Okay, so let's go ahead and give our page a refresh. Okay, so that's actually an okay error. So the reason for this is that we're actually returning the returning the promise here. So what we actually want to do is we want to wait until this promise is complete. So let's go ahead and say async. We'll make this an async function, and we will rather await for this load async here. Okay, so find this load async, wait for it, and then carry on and calculate the meta, since I want to do the meta here because we might get the post and then we want to load the meta based on the post. But for now, this will do. So let's go ahead and give this a refresh again. Okay, here we go. And if we look in the elements and the head, looks doesn't look like it's there. Is it? Okay, so there's the meta tags. So we have the title and the rest of the content here. I'm actually not sure why it's not showing up here. We have the styles. Not sure. Okay, so I guess it's just the Chrome sniffer that's replacing it. But the important part is that the initial page that is being returned actually contains our title and our meta tags. And as long as you got this, you're good. So let's go ahead and derive our title and our meta tags based on the post. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead in here, and here I will actually need a function since I'm going to be deriving stuff. And I will grab this object here, and I will need to return this object from this function, like this. Since this is going to be sort of an abstract concept that we're going to be able to get to pass stuff, and the only stuff that we can't pass, or rather care about, is this selected blog here. And at the moment it only lives in our state, so what we'll need to do is to pass our state here. And from our state, we'll just go ahead and say state dot selected blog, because if we have some other page and we want to pass a selected blog here, that's not going to work, because then we'll have to pass a selected blog to every single meta function. But rather, we want to pass our state, and then from our state, we want to extract whatever data we need. So I'm going to grab state selected blog dot title. And I'm just going to put this title everywhere. I'm not going to go ahead and create keywords, descriptions on my model here. I will keep it as is. It's just, as long as we see it in the browser, we know it works, and then you guys can go ahead and extend this application in your own way. So now in our server, this is obviously an object at this point. So what we want to do is we want to say component, and we want to check if this is a function. So if component.meta inherits, not inherits, but rather instance of, and function with big F, we want to grab the component, want to say meta, and we want to take our context and state and pass that in here. So I'm forgetting a question mark here, just like that. Right, so if the component.meta is a function, you can grab, we're basically going to execute it as a function. Otherwise, we're going to destructure it as an object. So remember that this function is actually going to be an object in the end. So it's alright that we destructure from it like this. Another way that you can do this recognition of a function, you can basically say type of, and this is going to return a string, so component.meta, and you can do something like this function. I think this is pretty inferior to this. This looks a little bit more strongly typed than this version, since you're basically comparing it to a string. And this is a little bit more strongly typed, so I prefer to use this option. So okay, we're passing in the state, and from this state we're gonna grab the selected blog, and we're gonna just grab the title and assign it everywhere. So let's go ahead and see this work. Let's go to here, and it looks like it's loading for a long time. Okay, so something has gone wrong. Let's go ahead and take a look at the server. So where did I make the mistake? Alright, so the mistake is right here, context.state. Let me move this, since we're setting context.state here. Before we were returning the promise, but now we're sort of awaiting for it to complete. So it will be alright for us to grab this state here, and basically, if we have been doing the load async part, we would wanna wait it here, but that would mean if we have a couple of them, we need to load all the context. So actually, this won't do. Let's go ahead and move the context back here. So we will still need to assign the context after all of our data has been loaded. So it's alright that we wait for this, but what we will do is change this context to the store, and that should actually be okay. So let's go ahead and give this a refresh. Okay, and yeah, so title is test, description is test, and keywords are test. And if I'm gonna go to test2 and refresh it here, we're gonna have keywords test2, description test2, and title test2 as well. All right, so I think this will nicely round up this episode. We're essentially loading the state on the server correctly and catching up on our client correctly with the state as well. We're loading our CSS using a template, and we are also loading the metadata and the title. So essentially, at this point, we're rendering a full HTML on the server side, the main part of a search engine. Being able to crawl our page and extract data from it is basically accomplished now. So thanks for watching. If you have enjoyed this episode, leave a like, subscribe. If you have any questions, leave in the comments. As always, I understand that this is quite a hard topic to grasp, so make sure you rewatch the videos and make sure that you ask questions if you have any of them. And most importantly, make sure that you take the time to step through the code and understand it. But nevertheless, thanks for watching again, and see you in my next episode.